Welcome back! Now that you've completed this great hat, we're ready to move on to our second project, which is a beautiful sweater. Now the sweater is going to be so much easier than you'd think because you've already mastered most of the skills that you need to get it done. So let's begin. This pattern is made for a 4 to 6 year old child. So if your child is a little bit on the smaller side, you may want to use one size smaller on the needles. If your child is a little bit larger, feel free to move up a size in the needles. That'll make enough difference for just regular growth in kids. So as we begin this pattern, you'll begin by casting on 57 stitches. You're going to begin on the front piece of the pattern. This is the front of the sweater. You'll work the first 11 rows in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. Once you've completed your ribbing, then you'll be ready to begin the pattern. You're using the same pattern design that we used on the hat. That pattern repeats. Once you've completed the first 4 pattern block sections, we'll be ready to start the decrease to create the raglan sleeve. So once you get to that point, join me and we will work the raglan sleeve together. Now that you've completed that first section, we're ready to begin the raglan sleeve. This is what your piece should look like at this point. As you can see, we've got the 4 color block sections, and then we've ended with the garter stitch here at the top. Now we're ready to begin our decreases so we can inset those sleeves. Now you may have noticed that I am using a circular needle. I went ahead and used the same needles that I used for the hat, and it's nice sometimes to use a circular needle here because it fits on your lap a little bit easier, takes up a little less space, but you're welcome to use straight needles if you prefer. It doesn't make any difference. Just thought I'd clarify in case you saw needles coming out of both ends of my work. You can use the circular needles to work straight pieces as well as working things in the round. As you begin this next section, we're going to be doing decreases, and part of the trick of this is maintaining the integrity of the pattern as you do the decreases. So that's what I'm going to show you as we begin to do our decreases in this section. Your first row is easy because it's just the solid color all the way across, but as we get started, we're going to do our decreases the same way we have on other projects. So you'll knit 1, and then you'll knit 2 together, and then you'll knit across the rest of the row. You're going to be decreasing at both ends. I'll show you what that looks like when we get to the end of this row as well. Here we are towards the end of the row. We've got 4 stitches left. Once you've got 3 stitches, you'll knit 2 together for your decrease, and then knit 1 more. Now by doing the decreases in 1 stitch, making sure we have a solid stitch in the end on each side, it'll make it that much easier to assemble the sweater. You will find some patterns where they have you do the decreases on the outside stitch. This will simply make it easier when we're going to sew those seams. So go ahead and continue your next row, and then as we begin row 3 of this section, we will be ready to decrease with the pattern, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to maintain the integrity of the pattern as you continue your decreases up the sides. As we begin the 3rd row in this pattern block, that's where we bring in our second color and begin the Fair Isle work. So let's do our first couple of stitches. We're going to knit 1, knit 2 together, and then bring in our second color. Now as you're working in these color block sections, there are going to be times when it asks you to knit 2 stitches together, and you'll find that your stitches are 2 different colors. Sometimes it's a little bit perplexing to figure out which color you should use, whether you go with the first one or the second one. And what you really want to do is you want to look at the overall effect of the pattern. So as you're losing a stitch, the stitch that you lose is really, you need to look at it as being the stitch from the outside, because whatever's left is what's going to show against your raglan sleeve where they attach. So be mindful when you're doing these stitches, if you find yourself in a position where the 2 that you're knitting together are of different colors, that you make sure to keep the integrity of the pattern in mind. We'll have an example of that in just a moment. This is a perfect opportunity to show you how we need to protect the integrity of the pattern here as we continue our decreases from the edge. Now if you look at this pattern, let's move over to the second pattern here. That's this one. You can see that we're starting a V and that this is the point. Now if you remember working on the hat and the rest of the sweater, you know already that this pattern will be white, white, tan, white, white, and then it should be tan, tan, white, white. Now, in order to protect this patterning, again, we're going to want to make sure that this portion of the pattern stays pure, and that where we have to take liberties is going to be over here on this edge. So if we do that count out of the pattern again and realize we do have to do a decrease over here, you'll see that the pattern will go white, white, tan, white, white, tan, tan. Now, and then we would be able to have white over here on the end. That means that these two stitches, because it's stitch 2 and 3, are going to be knit together. And even though both stitches are white, this stitch will be tan. The reason is because we want to keep 2 tan stitches on the outside of this V pattern. So let's go ahead and work this portion together. Again, we'll have white on the edge. Knit the 2 white stitches together as tan. And continue with the pattern. As you can see, the way this pattern is working across, by sacrificing this stitch here, this is going to disappear into our sleeve and into our seam. So we're not going to continue to work with this portion of the pattern anymore. So now as we continue moving up, this will be the first pattern in this section. So now that you've figured out how to successfully decrease while maintaining the integrity of the pattern, you can continue by following the printed pattern until we get up to the part where we're ready to do the neck edge. Once you're to that point, join me again and we will work that portion together. This is the place you should be at now. We're ready to begin the neck edge here. So this is how it should look. You'll see that you've got these lovely decreases along the edge. We're creating a raglan sleeve, and so they'll attach right here, and your pattern will match up along this edge. You've maintained the integrity of your pattern all the way across. And now we're ready to do the first section to the edge of the neck. So let's work together and knit across to the opening of the neck edge. Once you get to the place that you're about to start the opening for your neck edge, we're going to turn our work over right here in the middle of the row. As you read the instructions, it tells you to knit your stitches and then turn. This is a potentially confusing part in the sweater, so let's work it together. Now that I've knit up to the neck edge, I'm going to turn my work, and then I'm going to purl back across. I'm going to continue to work in my pattern. We're going to continue by working just the first stitches, and what this will be is the side between the neck opening and the arm attachment. So you're only going to be working with a few stitches at a time, even though there are still a lot of stitches left on your needles. Okay. So continue to work in the pattern, and don't forget to continue your decreases at the arm edge as well as the neck edge now. So as you get to your neck edge, I'll be there in just a second, and you will be too. Okay, here I am at the last 3 stitches before my neck edge. I'm going to do my decrease just as we were when it was at the end of our row. So knit 2 together and then knit 1. Now what you'll see happening is we're building on just this one side. These will stay the same, and we'll continue to build up this way until we reach the top of the shoulder. So continue working in the pattern, and once you've reached the top of the shoulder, then we'll join up together again to work on the neck edge and the other side. Once you're up at the top of the shoulder, your piece will look like this. It will feel a little bit strange because this piece will be tall and this piece will be short over here. That is how it's supposed to look, and I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to see how it looked on my needles, so that when you got to this same place, it would make sense to you. Now let's cast off these stitches at our shoulder. Cast off loosely, please, because you'll have a seam there, and it'll make it much, much easier if you've cast off nice and loose. Okay, we have successfully cast off our shoulder seam. Now you'll want to cut the yarn. And pull it through here, and this piece will be finished. Now we need to move back over to where we stopped for the neck, and we're going to deal with these stitches now. Use your stitch holder to slide these neck stitches to keep them out of the way. Okay, so there they are on my holder, and we'll keep them out of the way. We can pick back up where we left off now and finish this other side. So the yarn that you just cut, go ahead and add it back in and finish working this second part of the shoulder. Now once you've done this other side, your front piece will be complete. You'll be ready to move on to the back. The back is worked exactly the same as the front, except you don't do the neck at the same place. You'll move up quite a bit higher, you'll finish it off using the same technique, and then we'll be ready to join those 2 pieces at the shoulder. So once you finish these 2 pieces, join me and we'll connect the shoulders. Okay, we've now finished the front and the back of the sweater, and I've started to join the shoulders here. So if you look at this seam, this is a new seam that you haven't learned how to do yet. So let's use some sample pieces and do this together. I have 2 pieces right here. We're going to sew these together using this new seam. I'm going to use a blue yarn so that you can see the difference. Now on these 2 sample pieces, all I've done is 2 pieces of garter stitch, which is exactly how your shoulder seams ended. So this will be a great example for you to use. We'll start by picking up the first stitch. Now if you'll notice, I came in after the whole cast off. So you'll see this nice little row of V's. I'm coming in just this side of the cast off. And that's where we'll be inserting on the opposite side here as well. So as we come in here, come across to join the 2 pieces together. And then you're going to come back up, and if you look closely right here, you can see that I've gone under the entire stitch, just under one stitch. And there's two sides to the stitch. That's why you can see the two strings right here and here. Now we'll come back across to go into the same hole that you came out of here. And again, go under an entire stitch. Now as it's on my needle, you can see that there are 1 and 2 lines. See if I can separate these out a little bit for you here. As I go under it again, there's 1 and 2 that make up the single stitch. Make sure to keep your tail out of the way. And then come back across into the same hole again, pick up an entire stitch, and you're going to go back and forth in this fashion until your entire seam is completed. Let's do just a couple more stitches, and then you'll be able to get a better idea of what's happening with this seam. I'm going to leave these a little bit looser than I usually would, just for teaching purposes, so that you can see the stitches clearly. When I sew these seams myself onto the actual piece, I would do them just a little bit tighter than this. Not much, but just a little bit tighter. Make sure you're going back in every time to the same hole that your yarn came out of, and again it's just one full stitch. We'll do 3 more, and then we'll look at this piece from the front and the back and see what the stitch is doing. Okay, now if you look at this piece, you can see the individual stitches as they go across, but you can also see that what it does is it pulls the edges under here and here. So when we turn it to the back, you can see it's pulling them down. You can see your thread here and here, and you've got a nice smooth seam. Now it doesn't have to be garter stitch and garter stitch. This is the kind of seam that you would do anytime you're coming across the top or the bottom of your work, adjoining 2 pieces this way. In the past, for example, when we did the mitten, we did pieces where they were joined this way on the side. Okay, but this is the type of seam you would use when you're going to go across your work. So go ahead and use this technique and join both of your shoulder seams. So go ahead and get those seams done at the tops of your shoulders, and join me again and we'll get busy on those sleeves. Now that you've joined your shoulder seams together, you're ready to complete the arms. You know most of the techniques necessary to do the arms, but let's just refresh quickly. You're going to do your 2 inches of ribbing, and after you do the ribbing, we're going to start off again in the pattern. So let's look at our finished piece. You can see you've got the ribbing here at the bottom. You've got your patterning. It comes up to, this is basically going to be where the arms join. You've got your raglan edge right here, and your cast off along the top edge. Make sure when you're doing these sleeves that you don't start at the same place that you did with the front and the back of the sweater. Let me show you what I mean. This is my sweater sample that we've been working on so far, and you can see that the bottom where we've started has color block 1. Where the sleeve, the finished sleeve falls, we have an additional need for a color block down here at the bottom, so that everything will match up as you move up the piece and your sleeves will be long enough. Okay, so make sure that you're not starting on the same color block pattern that you did on the body. So go ahead and cast on your stitches for your wrist, and do the ribbing, and as soon as you finish that part, we'll be ready to go ahead and begin the color block pattern together, and I'll show you how to increase stitches while again keeping the integrity of the pattern intact. Now that you've completed the ribbing section on your first cuff, you can begin on your first pattern block. As we begin, we're going to be doing the increases. Let's do our first increase together. I'm knitting one and then doing my first increase. To do this increase, I'm going to knit in the front and the back of the stitch. So watch closely as I insert my needle as if to knit. I bring my yarn around, bring the loop up, but instead of sliding it off of the needle like we would usually do to complete a knit stitch, I'm now going to take my needle around to the back and go through the back part of the loop. Again, bring my yarn around and bring up a second loop before sliding it off. Now, where you had 2 stitches, you now have 3. Go ahead and continue knitting across this row. You can do your row of purls back. And when we start on row 3 together, again, I'll go over how to do those increases. Okay, we're approaching the end now. When we get to the last 2 stitches, we'll be ready to do the next increase. Okay, so once again, we're going to knit into the front of the stitch like a regular knit stitch. Bring your yarn around, pull the loop through, but do not slide it off the end of your needle. Instead, take your needle around to the back and put it through the back portion of the loop. Bring your yarn around again and through. And now you have 2 stitches in what would have been 1. Go ahead and finish your row. And now you'll see that you've increased by 1 stitch at each end. Now we're on row 3 of your pattern block. Again, we're going to talk about how to do your pattern while maintaining the integrity of the pattern here. So your first stitches, we're doing 1 and 2 stitches. Now it's time to add our color, but we're in the middle of an increase. You can still go ahead and do your increase right there. Let's add our yarn. Now I've done the first part of the loop. You watched me go through and do the first part, but I haven't pulled it off of my needle yet. So now I'll bring the needle back to the back, and with my new color, I'll do the second part of this stitch, this increase right here. So now we have 3 stitches where we started out with 2. We've done another increase and we've added our new color. Continue to work in the pattern and follow the rest of the directions on how to do your sleeve. We'll do another increase at the other end. Okay, here we are at our last 2 stitches. Again, you'll do your increase by beginning to knit, but not pulling it off of the needle. Bring it around from behind, pick up the stitch from behind, knit that stitch and pull it off. Now you have 2 stitches here instead of 1, and you can finish out your row. Now continue doing your increases as you work the rest of the sleeve, and once you've completed sleeve 1, go ahead and start on sleeve 2. Once you have 2 sleeves finished, then we'll be ready to attach them, do our neck, and finish our side seams. We're almost done with this sweater. You're doing a great job. We're ready to join this now to the body of the sweater. I've attached my first sleeve already, but I'm going to show you how to set this up so you can attach your sleeve as well. If you'll notice on this sleeve that I've already completed, all of our lines of color join, just like this. So when we're getting ready to lay out the attachment of our sleeves, you want to be very careful to make sure that all of your color blocks line up as well. You are going to have a lot of strings to work with at this point, so just push them out of your way. We'll deal with those later. Find the center of the top of your sleeve by folding it in half. Here's the center of the top of my sleeve. I'm going to line it up with the center of my shoulder seam. That's here. Now remember, we do seams from the top side. So as you do these pins, you're going to want to make sure that they overlap just a little. You can use regular sewing pins. They also have some thicker plastic pins that are specially designed for knitting. Sometimes I find that they're a little too bulky to work in small areas, so it's really up to you what kind of pins you'd like to use at this point. Now I've matched my center seam. The next thing I need to match is my first area of garter stitch. That's right here. Again, don't worry about these yarn tails. Match these up and put your pins in place. You're going to be unpinning these as you go. This is just kind of a guide to keep things more or less laid out. I work it back and forth, making sure that each section matches. Okay, so here's the top of my arm laid out. Now I'm going to move down to my next set of garter stitch, and I found this is easier to go from garter stitch section to garter stitch section than it is to go from one stitch to the next. You'll have plenty of room to ease these pieces in if necessary once you're doing the actual sewing. Remember to attach only as far as the raglan sleeve allows. Once your stitches start going in, once you've got the decreases, you know that you've reached the underarm portion of your sweater and you don't want to pin any further. That'll be a different seam. Okay. I now have the entire shoulder section pinned, and we're ready to begin attaching the seams. Generally, when I work on seams like this, I will use the myriad of tail yarns that I have on the other side. However, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to use one single thread so that you can follow along with me here. Because your tails are going to come out at different places than mine, it's just a wonderful way to work in your tails as you do your seam at the same time. So you can feel free to choose either option. Go ahead and thread a new needle or find the tail that comes in closest to where you're ready to begin your seam. Now I'm going to take out my pin. As I talked about earlier, we're going to take the pins out before we do each section. So I've taken the pin out. I'm now going to sew from here to the next garter stitch. Then I'll take out the next pin and continue that way. So let's start here. I like to sew from right to left. If you prefer to sew the other direction, that is completely up to you. Either way, the technique will be the same. Now, this is a little bit of a different seam because it's on a diagonal. So we're not following the traditional rules for side to side, nor are we following the rules for how we did these top shoulder seams. This one, there's a little bit of winging it involved. So it's about matching the pieces up and making sure that you maintain the integrity of the pattern as you go. Keep that as close to accurate as you can. And just keep some ease in there so that you're lining up more or less on the same stitch per row. So let's begin. We've got our garter stitches here. Remember, you're only trying to pick up the first stitch on each side. You don't want to go any further in than the first stitch. Otherwise you get bulky seams. And if you remember, when you're doing side-to-side seams, you don't want them to show, and so you're going back and forth Similar to how you did the top seams, a little bit different. Let's just refresh as we go into a stitch and come back up. There should be 2 yarns on your needle as you go under the seam, under the stitch. And then again, the same on the other side. Now that's a little bit confusing because you can see here we've got the 2 stitches and then there's an extra. That's actually part of one of my working tails from the other side. But by stitching it this way, it'll ensure that that tail ends up on the inside of my seam. If you pull too tight and you can't figure out where your last stitch came from, if you'll just pull it a little bit looser, you'll be able to see right where that last stitch came out. You can always tighten it up with this next stitch, but it's a good way so that you don't lose your mark. That's where I just tightened that up, and now that portion will just disappear. Go ahead and work your seam this way all the way across the piece until you've got your entire sleeve attached. Once your sleeve is attached, you can go ahead and do the sleeve on the other side. Once you finish the shoulder seams, you'll have 2 seams left and your neckband. Now the 2 seams, there will be 1 on each side. They will run from the wrist to the underarm and back down to the waist. And then we'll have the neck edge to put in. It's just a ribbing edge, but there are some details that you'll need to learn in picking up the stitches as we go around the neck. So once you've attached your shoulder seams, join me again and we will begin the neckband. We now have the shoulder seams attached. It's starting to look like a sweater now. We're ready to go ahead and do the neck edge. So let's begin at the back. This is a little bit tricky as we work around the edges because there will be sections where we're knitting right off of our stitch holders, and there will be other sections where we're picking up the stitches along the edges of our work. Now remember, when you're knitting off of the stitch holder, you're going to be knitting in your ribbing stitch. That's knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. When we're picking up the stitches, we're just going to be picking them up knitwise. It'll make more sense as we start to put it into action here. So let's begin by working in our knit 1, purl 1 ribbing right off of the stitch holder. Now depending on how you put your holder in, your stitches may be on straight or they may be on backwards. I'm seeing that I've put mine on so that my stitches look backwards. How you would handle this situation, if the stitch had been on straight, it would be this way. So the right hand side of the stitch would be on the top. If that were the case, you just go ahead and do the regular stitch. Now if it's the other way, and you can see this stitch it has the left side on the top, you can either take the time to turn that stitch around and work the stitch, or this one's also backwards. You know that you're coming in from the right side, you know that your needle is supposed to go under the right side of the stitch. You can just go ahead and work your stitches off of the needle even though they're twisted. Just be careful and realize that they are twisted, so you would never want to come in this direction. On a twisted stitch, if you came in from the top to do a knit, you would have just twisted the stitch entirely around. You would need to come in this way to do a knit on that stitch. The same thing's true on a purl. Instead of coming in for your purl this way, which flips this stitch around and makes it twist, you'd need to come in this way. Just make sure that what you're doing is opening up the stitch to create your purl or your knit stitch. Sometimes that happens if you have a needle fall out of your work and you go back and try to put things back onto a needle where it's fallen out. Sometimes you'll get your stitches in backwards. So it's a nice technique to know so that you don't get confused and you don't end up with a bunch of twisted stitches in your work. Okay, I've now come to the end of my stitch holder, so I'm going to discard that, and now I'm going to pick up the stitches along the edge. Now recognize that we've got diagonal, we've got straight, and more and then these are just vertical right here this way, and then more of the diagonal here. And we have to evenly space to pick up stitches all along that section. The easiest way to do that, if you're a crocheter, this will feel very comfortable for you. If you're not a crocheter, it's a new technique in general. You're going to use your needle to come down into the stitch and pull up a piece of yarn. Leave it on your needle, and we're going to call that a new stitch. So again, as I go through, I'm picking up just the side of my stitch. I'm just going under one thread at a time. I'm coming down, I'm picking up that thread, and then moving on to the next stitch. Now you're going to want to be careful with placement. If you pick up every piece of yarn along the way, you'll have a great big sloppy neck edge. So make sure that you just pick up the appropriate number of stitches as you work around. And sometimes you may have to, as you work along, you may discover you have just too many stitches on your needle. You may have to take them off and start again. Just make sure that your spacing is nice all the way around this neck edge. Remember, this part is going to be seen. It is the collar, and it's the place where the attention is because it's always at your face. So be very careful that you're putting these on nice and even. As you can see mine, they're evenly spaced all along the needle as I continue to pick up these stitches. Whoops. Sometimes you'll run into a little bit tight stitch. Just work with it and you'll get it to come through. All right, I found myself right here at my next knit holder. I'm going to knit right off of this just like it were a needle again. Now at this point you're going to want to count and make sure that you're going to end up on the right kind of a stitch. So as I look at the part where I've picked up off of the knit holder already, I can see where I've got knit and then purl and then knit and then purl, and I can identify these purl stitches because they're the ones that have the yarn that goes across. The knits come out of a V and the purls have a yarn that goes across. So as I get down here, I can see that I have ended with a knit stitch. So that means I need to count these out. So I would see knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, and do this all the way down here. So purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. I'm going to start with a purl. That'll make sure that it stays in the pattern, and that was what this was about, was making sure that everything stayed in the pattern. It would be a shame to get this far and then find that you have two purls or two knits together in your collar as you go across. So remember, we're working off of the stitch holder, and so we're doing the knits and the purls in the ribbing. Okay, we've just picked up the rest of the stitches on the stitch holder. We can discard that. Now we're ready to pick up these last stitches up around this side of the neck. Once you've picked up all of your stitches, you will continue working in a circle, which is wonderful because you've got your circular needle again. You'll continue to work in a circle, knit one, purl one, ribbing until it's about 1.5 inches long. If you find that you're knitting too tight so that your collar seems tighter and your circular needle doesn't seem to fit, you can go ahead and change over to the double pointed needles. Just like when we were working the hat and it started to get a little too narrow, you changed over to those double pointed needles because it helped keep it at the right distance around the top. So you can feel free to work with either your circular needle at this point or your double pointed needles, whichever is more comfortable for you. Once you get to the point where you're ready to cast off, this is very, very important. Please make sure that you cast off very, very loosely, because that's the part that has to stretch over someone's head. Now keep in mind that where you're casting off, those are the tightest stitches because there's no give left. So again, be very, very mindful that you cast these stitches off quite loosely. Once you finish that, all we have left are our final seams. These are the side seams that will go from the wrist to the underarm to the waist. Finish your neckband and then we'll do these last seams and you, my friend, will have completed your first sweater. Your neck is now finished. It should look just like this. You will have one little tail end that you need to still work in, but other than that, your neck is now complete. The last thing that we need to do before your sweater is completely finished is just these two seams that run from the wrist back down to the waist. Now I've completed the first seam. So you can see that the seams do match up. They're not as even as they are up through the shoulder seam, but they are a nice seam here. It's much more important to have your seams match in the most visual interest than it is to have them match somewhere underneath the arm. We still have some continuity because our pattern does go across. It just isn't quite as good of a pattern match as we go around the edge. Now you could solve that if you decided you wanted to work this sweater in the round, which could be done. Then you could continue your pattern all the way around rather than making separate pieces with separate seams. However, since we worked it in separate pieces, we do have a little bit of seaming that does show down the side. Now to do these seams, you're going to do them exactly the same as you did your shoulder seams up here at the top. You'll work from either the bottom up or you can work from the cuff of the sleeve. So you choose. Again, you can work with a separate needle and thread or you can just work your ends in. So go ahead and finish those last two seams and let's see your finished project. Now that you've finished your side seams, the sweater is complete. You've done a beautiful job and this is a wonderful project. I hope you had as much fun making your sweater as I did making mine. Let's review some of the techniques that we've learned. Some of them are review and some of them are new. In the hat that you did, you learned how to work on circular needles. You also learned to work with double point needles, and of course you've learned this fantastic new Fair Isle technique. In the sweater, you learned how to actually complete a finished garment to wear. You learned how to do a wonderful sleeve. You learned how to do all of your seams, top seams, side seams, and diagonal seams. And again, you've had the opportunity to master this wonderful Fair Isle technique. Congratulations on making a beautiful Fair Isle cap and sweater. Keep knitting!